We're in the far north of South Africa, in the land of the Venda people. The Venda have a long tradition of singing and dancing. But this is much more than a terrific performance. It's history. This particular song, complaining of hard times under colonial masters, was composed 100 years ago. In post-apartheid South Africa, it's now possible to study African history, which is how I found myself on the way to visit the King of Venda with an enthusiastic archaeologist, Sidney Miller. Sid, is this the palace?
That's right, Alan.
Why are these white stones here at the entrance?
These white stones are the monoliths that shows places where the normal commoner people are not really supposed to go unless they're escorted. This is Samuel and Alan. So we are going to go up to the chief's private reception area now.
I see.
And he escorts us all the way up there.
It's deliberately been made tiring and confusing for the visitor to work his way up through the compound. Everything is designed to promote respect. There are strict standards of conduct. King Kennedy arrives accompanied by his brothers and a praise singer whose job is to recount and explain the history of the king's names. We show the respect that is traditionally practiced here. Although the king is a member of parliament in Cape Town, when he's here in Venda, he tries to keep the traditional customs going. Now, is that only when you're greeting a stranger, or is it when you go from breakfast to your car?
Yeah, to my car, to anywhere. Wherever I go, they do like that.
I see.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes wish you could move a little faster, or have you made it part of your life? And
yeah, you know, sometimes I feel a little bit shy.
History for the Venda is passed on by tradition. But tradition is never static. It's not just the king who now works far away. And it's unlikely that the kings who went before him would have joined in the dancing. The risk is that tradition and history might be lost. But the king believes this new openness is essential.
I think it's better to be with the people, especially nowadays because we are living in a democratic society, and you must be with your own people. And
So there's still some of the old and some of the new. Tell me about that gun. What are we bringing that for?
Well, we're in the middle of the park, and the elephants are starting to use the footpath. This one that we made up to the site. So we need it for a bit of protection.
Oh. You can stop an elephant with that?
Well, it's a 458, and it does the job if it needs to.
Good. Well, why don't you go ahead? And keep your eyes open. 50 miles from King Kennedy's compound, inside the Kruger Park, Sidney Miller has been working at a site which is revealing Venda history in rich detail. Dating back to the 13th century, it's called Tulamela, a royal citadel just like King Kennedy's, perched on a commanding hilltop. For 3 laborious years, Sid and 2 helpers rebuilt the collapsed walls, stone by stone. Arriving visitors pass under these baobab trees. Then the same kind of stone markers that King Kennedy has point the way. Up the hill, we enter the first ceremonial space, where the dancing would have been staged. Now, what happened in here?
This is now where one of the real problems that we have got on the site. This is a female enclosure where a wife would have lived. And when I tried to excavate this area, looking for a structure, I found a floor that had collapsed in the middle. And when I'd excavated through that, I actually found a skeleton down there of a male, which is a very tall person, over 2 meters tall.
What section's everybody working on over here?
This is the chief's enclosures and the...
Sid had some unsolved problems, but some exciting finds, too. Across the royal reception area was the king's private enclosure, once containing a thatched house. We weren't permitted to film in this part of King Kennedy's compound.
Is this a pot here?
That is right. It's a pot that we have found in this very early phase. You can see the floor here is much harder than the floors we've seen at the top. And this pot is actually sitting on the floor in position here.
Ah, I see.
What is also very interesting here is this little cowrie shell. It's a seashell that has been used for trade money in the olden days. So we might even be sitting here with a pot that had some other valuable objects in it.
Oh, I see. This is like a little jewelry chest, maybe.
Also in the king's enclosure, iron bells of a type known in West Africa 2,000 miles away, but never before seen in southern Africa. And Sid's found glass beads from as far afield as India. So Tulamela had wide outside contacts. They were also great metal workers. These beautifully made harpoons are for hunting hippo. There were tough iron hoes for field work. A copper ingot caught at the moment of smelting. And gold, including droplets fresh from the crucible. It's always been known that this part of Africa had trade contacts with the Arabs and Portuguese. But it's thanks to Sid's archaeology that the breadth and sophistication of what went on here is being revealed.
Archaeology is like taking the soil and opening up the history book. Africa has always been seen as the neglected country. Everybody thinks about the Egyptians as high culture, but for the whole world to know that this people were just important as the Egyptians, I think that is what it's about.
But Tulamela is not just about history. It's about the present as well. In an approach probably unique in the world, excavation is overseen by a committee, not only of scientists, but also of local people from outside the park whose ancestors created Tulamela. And they'll stay involved in the future, too. I met the Venda school teacher, Israel Nemaheni, who will be interpreting the discoveries for visitors.
What does this mean to you?
Oh, to me, it means, in fact, it's my history. It means I have got somewhere, I'm coming from somewhere, and that is part of my history.
The skeleton in the women's enclosure presented the committee with a challenge. To proceed would risk disturbing an ancestor's grave, so they compromised. Excavation could go ahead so long as the remains were given a respectful reburial. And what a find they made. It wasn't a man, as Sid had thought, but a tall woman decorated with gold jewelry. Probably the 16th century queen of Tulamela. Soon after, the team found the king buried in his enclosure, also wearing lots of gold. The discoveries hit the headlines, the first royal couple ever excavated in southern Africa. There was rejoicing among the Venda people by one family in particular who had always thought their ancestors were buried here.
We come here with some beer, this is African beer, to pour down so that we can talk to our ancestors.
To stay in touch with ancestors is of the deepest significance because they provide the link to God. So from the family level to the national, Tulamela turned out to have gifts for everybody. Israel Nemaheni summed it up.
I won't say how will I feel as a Venda, but as a South African, I'm very happy to see that people are remembering their ancestors, but not as a Venda, but as a South African, because I regard the whole Tulamela as it is belonging to all people of South Africa.
Come visit us at PBS Online. Scientific American Frontiers can be found on the World Wide Web at pbs.org or America Online, keyword PBS.